Welcome back to Changing Austin. Today's guest is going to be a face that those who tune into Spectrum News on any regular basis are likely to recognize, as well as if you have cared about Texas politics for the past, couple of decades. Welcome, Harvey Kronberg.
More like almost 4 decades.
Ooh, almost 4.
38 years.
And I bet you can tell me exactly how many sessions.
This is my 29th special session, and we're really hoping he doesn't make me do 30.
Okay, you can stop at 29 and feel really good about that.
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
I'll feel complete.
Well, I am thrilled to have you here. So Changing Austin is all about what has made Austin the city it is leading up to now, and what is it that we need for the Austin of the future. And so I can think of few people who would have a great perspective on that than you, one who has lived and worked in Austin for many decades, but also some statewide perspective with a little bit of contrast to other places. So I want to start off, for those who may not know you, tell us what you're famous for.
I'm the publisher of the Quorum Report. I started as a contract writer in 1989, bought it in 1998. I was the first news outlet, frankly, in the country to go online with real delivery of real-time political news. And we actually had operations like the Washington Post come down and study us. Then if you look at their models, a lot of it replicates the model that we came up with. We are a publication designed for political professionals, not a mainstream audience. So we don't have to. We're able to write episodically, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, particularly during a legislative session. And we're typically the first breaking news. Sometimes we get credit for it. More often these days, in the way journalism currently is, we don't. But we are considered a must-read inside the Capitol, even those that think we're either flamingly liberal or flamingly conservative.
If you're getting that rep from both sides, you must be doing something right.
I'm fond of saying that I was kicked out of Ann Richards' Christmas parties because they considered me too far right, and then I was kicked out of Greg Abbott's because I'm too far left.
Then I don't know what says down the aisle. Yeah, both sides of the aisle, quite like an accolade like that one.
Yep, it's a badge of pride.
Nice. So, and how long have you lived in Austin?
Since 1968, when I was driving in for my freshman year of college. I think the roadside, they used to put up the population. Of course, that was at the end of the decade, but it said 168,000 people.
I mean, that's about close to what we have now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's a couple neighborhoods. That might be the domain.
Might be missing a few digits on
Right.
the end of that number. Okay, so let's start from when you first came to Austin. You were already in politics at that time?
Not at all.
No, okay.
No, this was the path of least resistance, actually. It's a really glorious beginning. I was supposed to go to law school, but the university, I went to Hebrew University in Jerusalem. They lost my transcript. And 2 weeks before my $350 a semester law school education was about to begin, I get a call that they can't let me in without 4 years of transcripts. At first, I was ticked off, and then I just saw crisis is a dangerous opportunity, so I went in the exact opposite direction. I became an auctioneer, a street vendor, a Renaissance Festival refugee, a bricks and mortar store owner on South Congress back next to Allen Boots back in I think I was in 78.
Wow.
And then I started a business, Austin Flag and Flagpole, in 1986. We were growing like crazy. Then we had the deepest recession Texas has ever had, except for the Great Depression. And we didn't shut down. We just kind of lived on fumes. And my father, wise as he was, said, if they come to you looking for credit in the midst of this recession, they've burned everybody else upstream, so you don't want to sell to anybody that requires credit. You only want to sell to Fortune 500 companies, of which there were 5 in 1986 or 1987, and government. And even government was taking 90 days to pay. That's how deep the recession was. Ooh. So I had to find another source of income while keeping the door open. Fortunately, we had converted the garage into an office, so the overhead was pretty low. And we survived. But as a result, I did some contract writing. I actually wrote the first policy manual, human resource manual for Whole Foods Restaurant in 1986 or 1987.
Wow.
And everybody else I wrote for went out of business until I got to my college roommate bought the Quorum Report when it had 150 subscribers. He calls me up and says, "You're doing some writing. You're going to write this publication." To which I said, "I don't know enough about politics to do that." And he called me back and said, "Okay, here's the deal. You can't quit for a year. I can't fire you for a year. Let's see what happens." And it took about the first 6 months were humiliating, and I really didn't have a clue. And then at the end of that first year, I hit a triple, if not a home run. I wrote a piece challenging the control the plaintiffs' bar had over the Democratic Party, and which for decades they branded me as, that's why I was branded. One of the reasons I was branded a Republican and nobody took on the trials. And just to finish the story, the head of the then largest tort reform organization, a fellow named Ralph Wayne, calls me up, and I have 150 subscribers at this point, and we were losing money hand over fist. And he says, "Nobody's ever taken on the plaintiffs' bar before. I want to reproduce it exactly as it appears. I want to distribute it to a few of our members. How much would you charge?" And I thought, 300 to 500, people. I said, "I don't know, 50 cents plus 50 cents a copy plus production costs." He said, "Well, let's start with 25,000." And we never lost money after that. And what Ralph did was I didn't really appreciate this till years later. I got an introduction to the business community from the ultimate legitimizing authority, the guy who was leading the tort reform movement. It opened doors just amazingly, and we went immediately to 500 subscribers, and did not see a jump like that till I went online.
Wow. Okay, so you navigated economic uncertainty, business ownership. I got to call a headline out that you mentioned $350 a semester for law school.
Correct.
Wow. Wow. And
easily the best bargain. And the entry requirements were not nearly as strict in those days, so there were people, let's just say marginal talents, that were in law school at that time, and some of them are still practicing.
Well, and imagine how your life might be different had those transcripts magically arrived.
My wife would have never married a lawyer, and so and we met at a Renaissance festival.
So
she
life
was
worked
doing
out as it
leather
should.
halter tops, and I was doing belts and buckles, so it was a perfect match.
That should be a podcast name. Halter tops and belts and buckles.
You betcha. If we had more time, I'd get more elaborate. But we don't.
So as you think about then, you have always operated at this intersection of policy, right, and everything you do with the Quorum Report and being around politics, but you've also always had business interests over the course of that time. How have those two factors in your life worked together or worked against each other?
Well, for years, the Capitol Press Corps would not acknowledge me because how could you own another business and be a journalist?
Oh, it was considered, as in
That was
you were not a
considered
legitimate
no-no
journalist.
back then. Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
It wasn't until about year 4 or 5 that they finally began to accept me because we were breaking so many stories and we were getting so much credibility inside the building. So, but the joke, the laugh line is I'm the only member of the Capitol Press Corps that's actually a practicing capitalist. So I've been, I've probably over the course of my career started 8 or 10 businesses and cumulatively employed, 200 people. So my wife used to joke, I was an aspiring hippie, but I kept hiring people and paying taxes, and they kept moving away from me on the Group W bench. So.
Fair enough. It's not very hippie behavior.
No. So I've been, on the margins pretty steadily now ever since I got here in 1968.
So you mentioned the Capitol Press Corps, and I know when you and I have spoken before, you've talked about how the Capitol Press Corps has evolved over years. Can you talk a little bit about how, what's it like in recent years as compared to when you were first starting out with the Quorum Report?
Oh, God, it was probably 50 reporters covering the
50.
Capitol, including television, radio. There were dedicated radio reporters that for the Capitol beat, and the press room was right next to the House chamber, and people would rush back, constantly moving back and forth. It was really robust, really alive. The Austin American-Statesman went after Speaker Gibb Lewis, and when they built the annex, he decided to move us as far away from the House chamber as he could. So we ended up in the basement between the loading dock and the cafeteria, so between the smell of industrial foods and trucks backing up. It was really an inviting atmosphere. But I loved it. I'd never worked in a press room before, and when I went online, we were making enough money to be able to afford it, and it was the most creative, robust, engaging thing that I probably have done. Well, no, that's a big one, but it was very hypnotizing to be part of a press community. And then in 2007, Craigslist comes along, and Craigslist essentially destroys the classified advertising for print media and begins to undermine. Well, you're starting to see cable cutting happen, so general news distribution started to fade away. And in 2005, I walk in the press room, and people are yelling at their editors. The editors are yelling back, "I need better sourcing," or "We need this to finish the story." And it was a learning experience from my perspective. But in 2007, the whole conversation changed. It all became about buyouts, and very little about editorial content, or they couldn't pay overtime. And if you're at the Capitol, the story that you're following may not hit its apex until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Sure. But if you have to punch out at 6 o'clock and they don't have somebody to replace you, and it was illegal for them not to pay overtime, even if you wanted to be there. So we just started seeing it hollow out. As a result of their shrinking, we grew pretty dramatically from 2007 to about 2014, and would have 3 to 5 stringers on for the legislative session, and we were Their hardship was our pathway to greater success.
Sure. It said in another podcast, "Your margin is my opportunity."
Yeah, well said. Yes.
That's the same idea there.
So,
isn't it fascinating though how something like paying overtime and classified ads, which have absolutely nothing to do with policy in Texas, have dramatically changed the way that we report on and discuss policy in Texas.
Yep, it's and it was so multidimensional. Even the Waco newspaper and the San Angelo Times or the Lubbock Times, Lubbock Avalanche Journal had reporters. They would parachute in, parachute out, but people that this was the legislative session was their beat, and now the Texas Tribune has tried to become AP, Associated Press, and feed some content. Hearst now owns the Austin American-Statesman, Dallas Morning News, San Antonio Express News, the Corpus Christi Caller Times, and there may be one more paper in there. And so I get the economies of scale. They'll have 5 or 6 reporters, but it'll be fairly homogenized coverage with a little less and less local flavoring. Typically, if you're from the Dallas Morning News and you would call a Dallas State rep, they would call you right back.
Sure.
Now they don't know who you're calling for and or which paper it's going to be in, and I'm not sure what the reaction is going to be inside the political community, whether it's going to be harder to gain access or not. Add to that the fact that the lieutenant governor several sessions ago decided to remove the press corps from the floor, which broke a 100-year tradition, and has isolated. He thinks that he's kept us from talking to the members, and to a certain degree it's true, but the flip side is that two-way exchange between reporters and policymakers actually has value to the policymakers.
Sure.
The questions that we ask and the relationships that we develop as a result of that is beneficial to them too. And so it was just part of Dan Patrick's effort to isolate his members from any inputs that he didn't control.
And so the whole landscape of the media around the policy has really changed.
Correct.
As a result of that.
And you have well, for instance, the last budget cutting session was in 2011. I think there are 4 of us that were here for the last budget cutting session. And there are only 6 senators and 18 out of 150 House members that were here in the 2011 budget cutting session. And I feel fairly comfortable predicting that next session is not going to be, we may have enough, but we're not going to have surpluses like we've had historically. Those surpluses have been based largely on population growth and inflation. And 2 years ago, when interest rates were at 5 or 6%, we had $30 billion essentially in a savings account. So that was another $1.5 billion just from money sitting in the bank.
Just growing.
But that's not.
We like it when people put money in banks.
Yeah. Nothing averse to that.
That's right.
I've even known to do that on occasion myself. So. But you think sales taxes have flatlined and even declined year over year. Property taxes are in decline, although that doesn't feed state government because housing values in Austin, for instance, have declined 10 to 20%. And we've made some very expensive promises, whether it's school vouchers or the now constitutional requirement to expand the homestead exemption to $140,000, for instance. That takes money out of local communities, but the state has to replenish a good portion of that money, and that number should only grow over time. So I've been predicting. We'll see if I'm right, but I've been predicting next session, or certainly by the one thereafter, we'll be in budget cutting. Maybe not draconian, but it'll be an eye-opening experience for these folks who think that budget surpluses in Texas are an entitlement.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep.
I want to shift gears now, away from politics, toward what I believe to be one of your passions. Let's talk about wine.
And we went broke. Michelle and I went broke in 1987, which is what precipitated my getting involved with the Quorum Report.
Oh, okay.
In 1991, my wife comes in and says, "Damn, we're paying the manufacturers off in 30 days." Whoa. And then 2 months later, she says, "Damn, we're actually paying the credit cards off every month." And I figured that meant I had disposable income, so I went over to Austin Wine Merchant, another historical artifact here in town, and walked in and said, "I want to start learning about wine, but don't want to spend more than $15 a bottle." And
like it.
It was either John Rennick, who is the owner, or Michael Villum, who was a restaurateur for years here, put their arm around me, walked me over to the Bordeaux section, sold me a Chateau Menet. I still remember. I still buy it.
Okay.
For $15. And I was pretty much hooked. And then as my disposable income expanded, so did my wine room. Then a developer in Austin named Larry Peel. His wife was involved in patient privacy. She was an MD, and she was very involved in patient privacy because records are shared all over the place despite laws supposedly protecting patients. So she's having a sign-a-die party, and I over at their place, and I go to the sign-a-die party, and Larry turns around, reaches out, and shakes my hand, says, "Well, have you gotten your Kistler allocation?" And I said, "No, but what the hell is Kistler?"
Is that a punishment? Is that a reward?
Right.
What is that? Yeah.
So, but Larry sucked me in. He was the one that discovered I was an auctioneer, and I got involved with the Wine and Food Foundation. The whole thing about being an auctioneer was doing pro bono auctions. I became kind of a specialist in fine wine auctions and experiential auctions. I did it all pro bono. Was that I got to taste things that I would never have been able to afford. Vintages, 30-year-old Bordeaux's, $800 wines, and I met people outside of both politics and construction, which was the two things that had most of my attention. So, it's just become, I guess I could still say passion. It's, I'm busy donating wine now to clear out space because I don't buy on allocation anymore. There's wines that you can only get if you get on their list, and sometimes you have to wait 10 years to be on their list.
Ooh, okay.
And I've kind of backed off from those. At my age, I'd rather buy wines with age on them. So I've been more in the secondary market and the auction market. And you don't want to ship wine in the summer to Texas. So
Sure.
October 15th, I have no idea how many cases are coming, but they're coming.
You're apparently going to have a big party. I know for those who may not be familiar with the terminology sine die as an end of the legislature.
End of session. Correct.
That, maybe you need to have an end of something in the fall party.
Well, I did have a tasting for journalists. They knew I was into wine, and so I invited a dozen of them over, and I put out some very expensive wines, and I said, "Now be sure not to take more than a half inch per pour because we're going to talk about them." Well, a short pour for a journalist is about 6 ounces. We went through those eight bottles in about a half hour. Needless to say, I did not replenish with expensive wines. Good wines, but not expensive wines anymore.
True.
So haven't had the journalist back, but we've had some tasting events at my place.
So as you think about this, so it's charitable, it's a hobby, it's an interest. it also led you to different communities that I presume became relevant for your work with the Quorum Report and with your businesses. How do you weave all that together?
Oh, whoa, that's an interesting question. Well, the political universe is really 1,000 people. 1,500 people. That's. I don't mean to degrade or demote anybody, but the core essentially revolves around 1,000 to 2,000 people. Of those, probably when I first started, it was all hard liquor. As a matter of fact, I did not drink at all when I got involved in politics. 3 senators liked what I was doing and invited me down to the cloakroom. And I tried to keep up with them, and I have no recollection of getting home. Now, probably half of those that drink appreciate good wine. So that we'll meet at Wink Wine Bar or Neighborhood Vintner or some of the local establishments, and I'll bring something noteworthy, and we'll have a bottle's worth of conversation. One of the firm rules of the Quorum Report, which I think pretty much the entire political community knows, if there's alcohol present, it is presumptively off the record. If we learn something in that conversation that we want to use subsequently, we will call the next day and essentially ask permission. In my business, because we write for political insiders, our mantra is it's better to be occasionally wrong than naive. They'll forgive me for being wrong because I can correct, but being naive, if they're going to take action based on what we write, naivete is inexcusable. And if you don't have to get drunk with them, you just share a couple glasses of wine, and pretty much any illusions you may have had or evaporate, and you get the real play that's going on.
Sure. So you discover they're real people, just like everybody else.
Exactly.
And
there's 3 things I found. One is if you go to the district during their campaign, you become friends forever. That's a bonding that very few journalists do. I did it. I was a road warrior when I was doing most of the writing. My editor, Scott Braddock, does that now. I can't tell you how many miles he puts on per year. The other is sharing a bottle of wine with them. And the third is we will frequently, during a regular session, go till 3 or 4 in the morning, especially at the tail end of the session. And if you stay on the floor with them, you'll be one of the only journalists there. They'll come they might be heading off to their office for a toddy, and they come back out, and you sit outside the rails and you talk, you develop a relationship. And those 3 things were really instrumental in building the kind of in-depth relations and trust that we've got. So he doesn't do wine, he does cigars, but it's the same theory.
2 of my favorite vices, both in moderation, naturally.
Indulgences,
yes,
not vices.
Oh, there you go. I like that. Indulgences, yes. So as you think about the future of the Quorum Report, so you were the first to the internet, and that was a really big play there. What do you think is next in that universe?
I'm old, and my editor is in his early 40s, a big generational gap, and also much more attuned to the various forms of social media right now. So he has a podcast that was in combination with Hearst. We're going to put that under the Quorum Report umbrella here in the next few weeks. We're going to create a media center, so all of our appearances will be available online. And we're just going to try and make things more robust, a little bit more interactive. We don't want commenting threads after stories because you have to monitor those, and there's too many trolls out there that just are interested in flaming. We're not going to go in that direction, but we're going to try and embellish our online presence with additional media and maybe some events. I think that's kind of the direction we're heading, and fortunately, Austin has no shortage of high-tech personalities. So it's when I first went online, it was the classic, 4 guys in a garage till 4 in the morning, grinding out, trying to create software when there was nothing off the shelf. Matter of fact, there was no PayPal. So if somebody wanted to pay by check online, they entered it into a template. We got it. We walked it over to the credit card processing machine, and then erased all of their information after we had recorded the payment. So
I don't think that would get past my InfoSec people these days. No. I don't think that would.
My greatest nightmare was having Bob Bullock's credit card stolen.
Oh, that could create some political consequences. So one thing I like to ask all of our guests is, as you think about Austin in the past, what is the thing that you look back and think, wow, that is one of the best parts of Austin? And as you look forward, what is something that you feel like is the most exciting thing for the future of the city?
The slacker culture in the 60s and 70s has kind of gotten a bad rap. It was also remarkably creative. So, for instance, Russell Corman's, the jewelry shop, he got his start on the drag next to me on a folding table, making silver Hishi necklaces, and now he is one of the most robust jewelers. We had drag vendors that became city council members or state reps even, and on the surface it was almost too laid back, but the flip side was there was no pressure. So in what other community could the Armadillo World Headquarters have been invented with mostly volunteers and essentially make Austin the music capital of the world, where you would have a Bruce Springsteen come to a concert for $3.
Wow.
That was part of the Austin persona. I should say that I also applaud a little less the explosive growth, because the wealth creation in Austin is supporting a much broader range of arts. It used to be that Austin Ballet performed at the Armadillo World Headquarters.
Really?
Yes.
Did not know that.
Yes, and it was mostly a volunteer ballet.
Oh.
The Armadillo was an old, Army armory, never fitted out for ballet, but it started provided the seed corn for any number of things. Today, you've got all this current wealth accumulated, and it has supported a broad expansion of both the fine arts and the alternative arts, and that has made this made it livable to put up with the tech bros and the congestion, et cetera, because Austin is so much more diverse. It was pretty monochromatic back when in the 60s and 70s. It's so much more diverse right now. And, of course, we lean heavily towards high tech, but the amount of intellectual ferment going on here is pretty remarkable.
Intellectual ferment. I'm going to find a way to use that phrase over the next couple of days, because I think that really captures a lot about sort of the density of our city, not physically, but intellectually.
Yeah. It's and it used to be the Austin Chronicle was the only venue to be able to find out what was going on. Now you get on any number of email lists, and it could be pop-up concerts, or it could be the Long Center just was able to lock down something, and it's going to sell out right away, so you better get your tickets now. So there's a lot of ways to find out what is going on, and then of course the food scene. If you're a foodie and a wino, wino is spelled Wineaux.
That's the classy way to spell it.
Requires a cork.
There you go.
That scene is obviously doesn't really compete yet with Houston, but it's becoming pretty damned interesting.
Absolutely.
So, and that you wouldn't be able to support that without the kind of growth we've had.
So our audience is mostly business leaders, business owners, folks who live in Austin. Maybe they've been here for a couple of years, maybe they've been here for a couple of decades. As you think about any advice you would leave them with, anything that you would share?
Put roots down in this community. One of the great problems I have with the evolution of Texas business is that when I first came into the game, the big money players had been here for at least a generation, and they had roots in Texas and investment in Texas. It was more than financial, and that has now become, since we don't have an income tax, one of the reasons we have business relocations is because CEOs can get their golden parachutes without having to pay income tax on it. So the business community, if they don't like what's happening in Texas, they can just pick Oracle decided to move to Nashville for whatever reason. They don't have to. They're not invested long term in the community like, say, Michael Dell is. And Austin, our explosive population has primarily been in the last 10 to 15 years, and my advice is put roots down, be part of the community. Your kids should go to. They're going to be in Westlake anyway, so they go to, stay part of the public education system, but mostly stay invested in the community and give back to the community, because it'll reward you back in ways that you can't imagine over time.
Totally. Thank you for being here, Harvey.
My pleasure.